Jasper and Isla never expected their adventure to end in terror. The moment they set foot on the island, the air turned heavy, the trees seemed to watch, and something unseen began to follow their every move. What looked like paradise was actually a trapand. The island had been waiting for them. I had always imagined this island as a hidden paradise, a place untouched by the chaos of the world. The moment the boat approached, the beauty was almost overwhelming. White sands stretched endlessly, and the water shimmered in shades of blue I had only seen in photographs. Trees lined the horizon, their leaves rustling softly as if whispering secrets I couldn't understand. My heart had been heavy with the stress of city life, but as soon as I stepped onto the shore, it felt lighter. I had no idea that the peace I felt was just the calm before a storm I couldn't even begin to imagine. The boat ride itself had been strange in ways I couldn't explain. The engine had sputtered at least twice, cutting out completely for several seconds each time, leaving us adrift in the water. The operator laughed it off, muttering about old engines and bad luck. But I couldn't shake the cold, prickling sensation running down my spine. Something about the silence on the water felt unnatural. The island had seemed smaller from a distance, but now, walking closer to the cabin I had rented, it felt almost alive, dense, watching. The cabin was small, old, and slightly run down, but it had a charm I couldn't resist. The paint was peeling, the windows were dusty, and the porch sagged slightly in the middle. Inside, the air was heavy, stale, and warm, like it hadn't been touched in months. I dropped my backpack and wandered from room to room, taking note of the simple furniture: a wooden table, a bed with thin sheets, and a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but the more I looked, the more details made me uneasy. Faint scratches lined the floorboards, as if someone or something had been pacing in the middle of the night. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in blood red and orange hues, when I decided to walk toward the beach. The sand was cool beneath my feet, and the waves crashed rhythmically against the shore, a sound that should have been comforting but somehow wasn't. As I walked, I noticed something strange. Footprints large, deep, and uneven marred the sand near the tree line. My stomach twisted. I had arrived alone. There had been no one else on the boat. Whoever had made them had been here before me, or perhaps was still here. I approached cautiously, tracing the edge of the prints with my fingers. They weren't human, not entirely. Beside each footprint were smaller depressions, shallow, claw-like, almost animal in shape, but too deliberate to be accidental. My mind tried to rationalize it, perhaps some local wildlife, but even as I thought that, a cold wave of fear crept over me. The shapes seemed purposeful, as if someone or something had walked alongside a human companion, leaving a trail for me to follow. The sky darkened quickly, faster than it should have, and shadows stretched across the sand in strange angles. The trees behind the cabin swayed violently, though the wind had died down. I felt eyes on me, though when I turned, there was nothing but the thick jungle. My pulse quickened, and a creeping sense of dread settled in my stomach. Something was waiting in the forest, something patient and watching. Returning to the cabin, I locked the door and double-checked the windows. Every sound outside seemed amplified: the scraping of branches, the distant call of an unknown bird, the soft crunch of sand under weight. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. Yet, even as I told myself that, the footprints remained clear in my mind, etched with precision, leading into the dark heart of the jungle. Night fell abruptly, as if someone had drawn a black curtain over the island. Moonlight barely filtered through the thin clouds, casting jagged shadows across the cabin floor. I stared at the door, my hands gripping the edge of the bed. Then I saw, I thought I did. A shadow flitted past the window, too large to be a small animal, moving with a deliberate, almost predatory grace. My breath caught in my throat, and I pressed my back against the wall. For the rest of the night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of leaves, made me tense, my ears straining for the faintest sound of movement. I imagined figures circling outside, waiting, observing. The footprints in the sand replayed in my mind endlessly, growing larger, stretching farther into the jungle. And then, just as I was finally drifting into a restless sleep, I heard it, a low guttural sound, distant but unmistakable, coming from somewhere deep in the jungle. It was deliberate, it was waiting, and it was getting closer. The night after I arrived, sleep was impossible. Every sound felt amplified. Every shadow seemed to twitch with life. I kept imagining the footprints I had seen, wondering if whatever had made them was still out there, just beyond the edge of the jungle, waiting. By morning, I felt drained, my body tense and my mind restless. I needed to move, to explore the island, even though a part of me screamed that curiosity would only make things worse. I decided to leave the cabin and follow a narrow path leading deeper into the jungle. Sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy above, leaving everything in dim greenish gloom. Every step I took was accompanied by the sharp snap of twigs and the rustle of leaves, but I felt like something was moving just beyond my vision, always keeping pace with me. I tried to tell myself it was animals, monkeys, birds, or even crabs, but the feeling of being watched refused to leave me. Hours passed, though it was hard to tell. The jungle twisted and turned, making it difficult to keep my sense of direction. I stumbled upon a clearing, where the sunlight filtered through the leaves in fractured shards. At first it seemed peaceful, almost beautiful, but then I noticed the small details that made my stomach twist. The ground was littered with debris, broken shells, decaying leaves, and something else. Something that looked like remnants of clothing, shredded and worn. My pulse quickened as I stepped carefully, realizing that these were not natural remains. Someone or something had been here before me, and perhaps not long ago. I pressed on, drawn toward a structure partially hidden by vines and undergrowth. It looked ancient, almost ritualistic, with stones stacked in patterns I couldn't understand. Carvings etched into the surface were grotesque, faces frozen in terror, mouths open as if screaming silently, eyes wide and hollow. My hand hovered above one of the carvings, feeling the grooves in the stone. They were rough and real, not just decorative. The more I looked, the more I realized they were not random, they were warnings. A record of something that had happened here long before I arrived. As I examined the stones, I became aware of footprints around the clearing. Large, deep impressions, accompanied by smaller claw-like depressions. My stomach twisted with fear as I traced the patterns. They were similar to the ones I had seen near the cabin. Whoever or whatever had made them had been moving deliberately, circling the clearing, and then returning into the jungle. I felt a cold sweat break out along my spine. The realization hit me I was being stalked, not by animals but by something intelligent, something that wanted me to know it was there. I turned to leave, but the jungle seemed to close in around me. Branches reached out as if to block my path, roots tangled around my feet, and the air grew thick and heavy. A low sound echoed from somewhere deep within the trees, a guttural, almost human-like moan that made my hair stand on end. My instinct screamed to run, but my legs felt sluggish, as if the jungle itself was holding me in place. I stumbled forward, eyes darting from shadow to shadow, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. Then I saw it, a figure emerging from the edge of the clearing, thin, elongated, almost skeletal, its limbs unnaturally long, its head tilted at an impossible angle, watching me with dark, hollow eyes. Panic surged through me, and I tried to move faster, but the ground beneath me seemed to shift. The figure didn't move closer, it didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough to freeze me in place. Around it, smaller shapes darted in and out of the shadows, hunched and crawling like insects, their red eyes glinting in the dim light. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots and hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through my shoulder, but I didn't have time to care. When I looked up, the main figure had vanished, leaving only the smaller shapes lurking at the edge of the clearing. I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly, branches whipping against my face, my lungs burning with each breath. The path seemed endless, twisting back on itself, until I realized I was not running away from the clearing, but being led back toward it, as if invisible hands were guiding me. Finally, I burst through the last line of trees. Arriving back at the cabin, my hands shook as I locked the door and drew the curtains. The forest outside seemed almost alive, breathing and shifting, waiting. I sat on the bed, trying to calm myself, but every sound of movement, every faint rustle of leaves, made my heart jump. And then I noticed a new set of footprints outside the cabin, impossibly close, circling the structure before disappearing into the jungle. I pressed my back against the wall, eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the windows. The sense of being watched was overwhelming. Something had followed me back. I could feel its presence, patient and patient, just beyond the glass. I had entered the island willingly, thinking it would be a place of solitude and peace. But now I understood. The island wasn't passive. It observed, it hunted, and it had marked me as its next victim. As the night deepened, a cold, guttural sound drifted from the forest once more, low, deliberate, and terrifyingly close. I realized that I was not alone, that the figures in the jungle had been waiting for me from the start, and somewhere deep inside, I knew that when I fell asleep even for a moment they would come closer, waiting for me in ways I could not imagine. The night after my second day on the island was worse than the first. Sleep had become impossible, each moment of darkness stretching endlessly. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind through the trees, sounded like deliberate movement, like someone or something was pacing just outside. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, or perhaps small animals scuttling near the cabin, but my gut told me otherwise. The footprints I had seen near the cabin and in the jungle replayed in my mind constantly, each step a reminder that I was being watched, followed, and maybe even hunted. The next morning I forced myself to leave the cabin again. My curiosity was mingled with terror, but I had to understand what I was dealing with. The jungle seemed denser, darker, almost suffocating. Sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy, and every step I took brought me deeper into the shadows. The air was heavy, wet, and smelled faintly of decay. The further I walked, the more I realized the island itself was alive in ways I couldn't understand. The trees seemed to bend subtly, their branches shifting just out of the corner of my eye, as if guiding me, or perhaps blocking me. I stumbled into a clearing I hadn't noticed before. It was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of birds and insects absent. The ground was littered with broken shells, shards of wood, and bits of clothing, some tattered, some torn in ways that suggested violence. I stepped carefully, my heart pounding, and realized the area felt like a trap, a space where the island wanted me to pause, to see what had come before me. My stomach twisted as I noticed the footprints again, large, deep, paired with the smaller claw-like impressions I had seen earlier. They formed a circle, surrounding the clearing, before leading back into the dense forest. Someone or something had been here recently. I pressed on, my feet moving almost automatically toward a structure partially hidden by vines. It was old, ancient even, and its stones were carved with grotesque figures, faces twisted in agony, eyes hollow, mouths open as if screaming silently. I ran my fingers along one of the carvings, feeling the rough grooves under my fingertips. It was not decoration. Each mark felt deliberate, a message or warning from those who had come before. My mind struggled to comprehend what it meant, but an instinctive fear rooted me to the spot. Whatever had done this, whatever haunted the island, it was intelligent, it watched, it waited. Suddenly, I felt it again, a presence behind me, patient, deliberate. My pulse skyrocketed as I spun around, but there was nothing, just shadows shifting at the edge of my vision. And then I saw movement. A figure, tall, thin, its limbs unnaturally long, emerging from the trees. Its head tilted in a way that defied human anatomy, and it stared at me with hollow, dark eyes. My chest tightened, every nerve screaming to run, but my legs refused to obey. I could hear faint skittering noises around it, smaller shapes darting between the trees. Their eyes glinted red in the dim light, watching, waiting. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root, and my hands scrabbled at the dirt to steady myself. When I looked up, the tall figure had vanished, leaving only the smaller, hunched shapes lurking at the clearing's edge. I wanted to flee, but the jungle seemed to shift, blocking my path in ways I couldn't explain. It felt as if I were trapped in a living maze, every turn returning me to the same place. Panic surged and I ran blindly, branches whipping against my face, my lungs burning. The skittering shapes followed, their movements silent yet purposeful. After what felt like hours, I finally burst out of the trees and back toward the cabin. My hands shook as I locked the door and drew the curtains. The island felt different now, alive in ways I had never imagined. The air was thick, oppressive, carrying faint, guttural noises from deep in the jungle. My eyes scanned the sand outside, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. Footprints, new and fresh, encircled the cabin, leading to the edge of the forest and back again. They were not my own. I had been inside, yet someone or something had been outside, tracing my steps without me noticing. I sank to the floor, pressing my back against the wall. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I knew the island wouldn't let me go. It was patient, deliberate, its hunger slow and methodical. The sound of the skittering shapes moved closer, circling the cabin, and I realized with growing terror that I was never alone. I had entered the island thinking I would find solitude, peace, maybe adventure, but the truth was far worse. The island was a predator, and I was already trapped in its web. As night fell, a low guttural moan echoed from the jungle. I could feel the eyes of the figures on me, patient and unrelenting. And then I noticed the final, horrifying detail. A set of footprints inside the cabin, leading from the door to my bed. I hadn't gone outside. I hadn't let anyone in, yet there they were, small depressions in the dust, claw-like and deliberate. Something had been inside, watching me while I slept, and somewhere in the shadows, it was waiting, patient, hungry, and unstoppable. By the time the fourth night fell, I felt like I was suffocating in the cabin. Sleep had become impossible. Every creak, every gust of wind through the trees, every distant rustle made my heart leap, convinced that someone or something was outside, just beyond the walls. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, that the island was just playing tricks on my mind, but deep down, I knew the truth. The footprints, the carvings, the strange noises, they were all warnings, and I had ignored them. Morning brought no relief. The path to the shore, which had been clear when I arrived, seemed to have vanished overnight. The trees and undergrowth had shifted, their roots curling like fingers over the sand, making it impossible to find my way back to the beach. Panic settled over me, but I forced myself to move. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I followed a narrow trail that wound into the jungle, each step sinking into soft moss and damp soil. The air was thick and heavy, the smell of decay growing stronger. Somewhere far off, I could hear the low murmur of water, though the sound seemed closer than the shoreline should have been. I stumbled into another clearing, unfamiliar but hauntingly familiar, as if the island itself was repeating patterns to trap me. The ground was littered with shells and old bones, some human, some animal. It was impossible to tell. The feeling of being watched intensified. Tiny shapes darted between the trees, hunched and flickering in and out of sight. Their eyes glowed faintly, a sickly red in the dim light. I could feel them circling, waiting, and my heart thumped so loudly it seemed to echo across the clearing. Then I saw it. At first it was subtler, dark ripple in the water at the edge of the clearing. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, but the shape grew, stretching longer, limbs tangled and unnatural, dragging slowly toward me. It wasn't a fish or any creature I recognized. It moved with purpose, deliberate and patient, as if testing me. I froze, unable to look away. A sense of dread filled me, heavier than anything I had ever felt. The island was no longer passive. It was alive, stalking me, testing me, claiming the space I thought was mine. I ran, twisting back through the trees, but every path seemed to bend and fold, always bringing me back to the same place. The skittering shapes followed silently, circling in ways I couldn't track. Then I realized something that made my blood run cold. My own footprints in the sand had shifted. They weren't where I had left them. They now led toward the jungle, toward the water, as if some unseen hand or presence was guiding me, forcing me deeper into the heart of the island. I stumbled back to the cabin, hoping for refuge, but it felt different now, almost alien. The walls seemed to lean inward, the air thick with a damp, metallic scent. I locked the doors and drew the curtains, trying to convince myself I was safe. But the shadows outside were restless, moving with an intelligence I couldn't comprehend. The scratching at the door grew louder, deliberate, patient, like claws testing the barrier between me and the darkness outside. My stomach twisted as I realized the island didn't need to break in. It was already inside me, in my mind, in my body, claiming my fear as its own. Then I noticed it in the faint light, near the water's edge. More movement. The tall skeletal figure from the jungle appeared again, standing at the tree line, its head tilted unnaturally, its eyes glowing faintly, and behind it dozens of smaller shapes darted like shadows. My blood ran cold as I saw my own footprints leading directly to the tree line. I hadn't walked there, I hadn't left the cabin, yet the marks were there, fresh, deliberate, as if something else had been moving me, guiding me toward the waiting darkness all along. I sank to the floor, pressing my back against the wall, my mind spinning. The forest beyond the cabin was alive, breathing and shifting in ways I couldn't comprehend. Low guttural sounds echoed through the trees, and the skittering shapes grew bolder, closer, their red eyes glinting through the darkness. The island didn't just trap you, it manipulated you, claimed you, and then led you to its waiting horrors. As the night deepened, I realized the worst part. I wasn't just being hunted, I was being trained, prepared, molded to be part of the island itself. Every movement I made, every instinct I followed, led me deeper into its design. The boundaries between the island and myself had blurred. The shadows outside the cabin whispered my name, or maybe they whispered the name of the next person who would arrive. And somewhere in the darkness I knew the skeletal figure was watching, patient, deliberate, waiting for the moment when I would no longer be able to resist, when I would finally step fully into the island's embrace. By dawn, the island felt more alive than ever, suffocating in its own stillness. I had spent the night huddled in the cabin listening to the scratching, the soft skittering, the guttural sounds drifting from the trees. Sleep was impossible, and even the faintest doze left me with visions of shadows circling the cabin, stretching longer than they should, twisting and shifting with impossible speed. My fear had reached a point where even the simplest movement made me flinch, and I was sure that the island had claimed a part of me, embedding its presence in my mind. I decided to try leaving again, to reach the shore no matter what. But the landscape had changed overnight. The familiar paths were gone, replaced by dense, twisting undergrowth. Roots curled over the sand, vines blocked what little sunlight reached the ground, and the air smelled of decay and dampness, so strongly it almost choked me. Every step forward felt like sinking, as if the island itself were dragging me back, keeping me trapped. I realized with a shiver that no matter where I went, I would return to the same place, the same clearing, the same carvings, the same shadows lurking just beyond vision. I stumbled into that clearing once more, the one with broken shells, old bones, and remnants of tattered clothing. It was eerily quiet, but the air was thick with anticipation, as if the island was holding its breath. The small hunched shapes darted among the trees, their red eyes glowing faintly, observing my every movement. I could feel their intelligence, a predatory patience that chilled me to the bone. I wanted to run, but the ground beneath my feet felt sticky, resisting my steps, forcing me to slow, to hesitate. And then I saw it, the tall, skeletal figure, rising from the edge of the clearing like a nightmare made flesh. Its head tilted in that same impossible angle, and its dark eyes locked onto mine. I could feel the weight of its gaze pressing down, suffocating me. Behind it, dozens of smaller shapes moved in coordinated patterns, circling me, darting closer and back, always returning to the tall figure as if waiting for its command. My chest tightened, my mind screaming, but I couldn't escape. The island had folded in on itself, a maze designed not to confuse me, but to prepare me for what it wanted. I turned and ran blindly through the jungle, branches whipping against my face, roots tangling my feet. Every step brought me back to the clearing, as if invisible forces were guiding me. And then the worst horror of all became clear. My own footprints led me here. I had not walked this path. I had not left the cabin. Yet there they were, fresh, deliberate, guiding me like a puppet. The island wasn't just alive, it was aware, moving me, controlling me, preparing me to join its endless waiting. Desperation drove me to the shore where the water had once been calm. Now, the The waves were dark, black, and thick, stretching further inland than before. Something moved beneath the surface, long, twisted shapes, dragging slowly toward the sand. It wasn't water, not entirely. It was alive, part of the island itself, waiting to claim me. My mind screamed to run, but I knew there was nowhere to go. Every boundary, every edge, every path had disappeared. The island had consumed them all. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and fell to my knees. That's when I saw the tree with the carvings again, and this time, the realization hit me like ice. My face was etched into the trunk, hollow eyes, a twisted mouth captured forever in wood. I had become part of the island's memory before I had even realized it. My reflection in the water confirmed it, my body trembling, yet my face in the carving staring back at me, frozen in terror. I wanted to scream, but no sound emerged. The shadows closed in, patient, deliberate, their red eyes glinting with anticipation. And then I understood the final horrifying truth. The island didn't just trap you, it claimed you, folded you into its history, and used you to lure the next victim. My footprints, my fear, my panic, it was all part of the design, leading the next wanderer into the same trap. The jungle, the water, the cabin, they were not barriers, they were tools, shaping me into a guide for whatever came next. I ran again, though I knew it was useless, twisting and turning through paths that led nowhere. The water rose higher, the shapes beneath it rising, the skeletal figure and its attendants closing in. My breath came in ragged gasps as I realized I would never leave the island. Even now, as I write this in a journal I hope someone finds, the shadows are at the edge of my vision, waiting. My own voice seems to whisper from the trees, a warning, a lure. If anyone ever comes here, you will see the footprints, and if you look closely, you might see my face in the trees. But don't think you can escape. The island never forgets, and it never lets go.